Welcome one more day to a new historical torture video, TikTakers. We have on the channel several videos of terrible punishments that were carried out in ancient times, both physical and psychological. Today, we will talk to you about some new ones, but this time we will focus on those that just imagining them will make our heads explode with pain. Ready? We start with the head crusher. With the name, you can get an idea. Don't be fooled that it's a classic. This torture instrument applied in the Middle Ages focused on bursting the bones of the skull. It consisted of a metal device that had a type of operation similar to that of a press. The condemned man's chin was placed on a lower bar, and on the top of his head, a helmet. On top of this was some kind of giant screw with a crank that controlled the pressure. With each turn of the crank, the screw lowered the helmet, pushing the head down with great force. The effects produced by this process are more than evident. First, the teeth were broken. They kept spinning, and he broke his jaw. The macabre torture continued, while the eyeballs came out of their sockets. And through those same cavities of the eyes, the brain drained like puree. It was also common for part of the brain to come out through the nostrils and ears. The pressure was so great that it exploded through all the escape routes in a human head. We already warned you, TikTakers. It would hurt you just imagining it. This same system was used in two very similar tortures, the thumbscrew or the knee crusher. The thumbscrew was a torture that consisted of crushing nails, phalanges, and knuckles slowly and progressively. They did it with a special tool that gives its name to this torture, the thumbscrew, made up of two metal plates and two screws. These plates were fitted around the victim's finger, and pressure was applied by turning the screws with a wrench until the finger was crushed. What they sought was to do as much damage as possible, so they extended the agony for hours or days without causing fatal damage. Little by little, they were able to reach the complete mutilation of the hand, finger by finger. The result was that with very little effort from the executioner and without the need for large expensive instruments, they generated a great deal of pain. In addition, it could be used with people of any age or size, which is why it was one of the most used punishments to obtain confessions. As for the knee crusher, it was an instrument with two sides full of very sharp iron spikes. It is said that the number of spikes could vary depending on the type of crime that had been committed. When placing the device on the condemned man's knees, the screws were turned so that the spikes lowered, putting pressure on the body. First, the skin broke, then the bones. Although it has this name, it was also used in other areas such as elbows, arms, and legs. Another of the most terrible tortures was the Roman candle. Its precursor is said to have been Nero, the ruthless Roman emperor. He hated Christians, so he came up with a terrible idea to get rid of them, using them as candles or human torches at his parties. First, they tied the victims to high stakes, and then they poured flammable liquid over their bodies to set them on fire. The flames began at the feet, prolonging the agony and suffering. They used a flammable liquid, but one that didn't burn very quickly. Kill them soon? It wouldn't be fun for the emperor. He wanted to see how the victims writhed as they felt the fire burning them, and that the terror of seeing how they burned alive was one more torture. After the limbs, the flames went up to the torso and finally reached the head. After their skin fell off and their muscles and organs were consumed by the flames, their remains remained on the stake. In this way, they were shown as trophies, making clear the power of the emperor. And above all, what could happen if someone dared to oppose him or be his enemy. The next torture we will talk about is poena culae, better known as penalty of the sack. It was used with people accused of patricide, that is, killing parents, siblings, or another close relative. The punishment consisted of covering the condemned man's head with a bag made of animal leather. They tied him up and began to beat him until he was bloody. In some writings, it is mentioned that they whipped him with what they called verges sanguinis, a kind of rod, and they put wooden shoes on him. Meanwhile, he couldn't see anything. He could only feel the severe pain caused by the blows and the lack of air from having his head covered. Once they considered that they had left him badly injured enough, they put him in an oxide bag, which was large enough to fit in whole. And in addition, they put several live animals inside: a rooster, a snake, a monkey, and a dog. Afterwards, they sewed the bag. The enclosed animals went crazy, blindly harming each other. Their survival instinct to try to get out manifested itself in the form of fights, pecks, and bites that destroyed the body of the condemned man. As if it weren't enough punishment, they later threw the bag into the water, whether it was sea, lake, or river. If the animals didn't kill the victim, he would end up drowning, either due to a lack of oxygen, if the bag was sewn so that it was completely airtight, or by water, if there was any leak. Well, not only him, the poor animals, through no fault of their own, were also led to an agonizing death. Those who used this torture relied on the fact that it was a form of punishment that prevented the offender from contaminating the four elements: fire, water, earth, and air. For this reason, he was put in a leather bag so as not to die in contact with any of them. We continue with impalement. Many civilizations and cultures practice this terrible form of torture. It consisted of impaling the victim with a long, sharp, and often greased stake. Sometimes they did it longitudinally, and other times transversely. For the longitudinal, the person was placed on top of the spike, and it was inserted through their private parts, or the lower area of the abdomen. As gravity took its toll, the tip passed through them, avoiding major organs and emerging through the skin of the shoulder or neck. A person could survive this for several hours or even days. It is said that expert impalers were those who were able to insert the stake perfectly, avoiding all areas that would result in almost immediate death. On other occasions, when they didn't care that death was quicker, the stake went through everything inside them, coming out through the mouth. As for punishment transversely, the cane pierced the torso, either from front to back or vice versa. The stake remained stuck in the ground, leaving the victim hanging. In this way, a public demonstration of power was carried out. This type of torture appears in several ancient writings. Thanks to them, today we know that it was used in civilizations such as the Neo-Assyrian Empire, the Persian Empire, or ancient Rome. It was also used in Romania by Prince Vlad III of Wallachia, known as Vlad the Impaler. His nickname says it all, right? Surely it sounds more familiar to you because it is the historical inspiration for the character Dracula, created by Bram Stoker. This prince stood out for his great cruelty. It is believed that Vlad discovered the method of impalement in his adolescence, during the period he spent as a hostage of the Ottoman Empire. Later, he used it on numerous occasions with the people he condemned, impaling around 20,000 people in a single zone, the so-called Forest of the Impaled. Later, he was captured, and it is said that while he was imprisoned, his obsession with impalement was so great that he would tear splinters of wood from the ground and drive them through the bodies of rats, spiders, and other small animals and insects that caught. Afterward, he placed them in the window as a trophy. This painful punishment could be alleviated by death when the stake pierced the heart. It is said that this type of torture could have been one of the inspirations for the legend of Dracula, for which he could only be killed with a stake driven through the heart. Closely related to impalement is the bamboo torture, a punishment in which a sprout of this plant grew through the victim's body. First, they tied him firmly on a surface on one or several bamboo shoots. After several days, the very sharp and rapidly growing sprout was beginning to pierce skin. Then, with its hardness, it penetrated the victim's body, and it continued to grow until finally the sprout managed to break through and come out of the other side. It is said that this torment was used in countries such as China, India, and especially Japan. Although there are those who believe that there is not enough evidence to believe that this really happened. For this reason, the cast of the television show Mythbusters investigated this torture in one of its 2008 episodes. What they discovered was that the bamboo shoot could pass through several centimeters of ballistic gel in 3 days. Ballistic gel is used for research purposes as it is considered comparable to human flesh. This fact confirmed the viability of this form of torture. It would be possible. According to studies, bamboo is the fastest growing plant in the world. Most grow between 5 and 20 centimeters a day, but there are some species that can grow up to almost 1 meter per day. On the other hand, getting back to torture, bamboo shoots weren't the only live vegetation that was used to impale while growing. A similar torment with nipa palm buds also appears in Thai texts. We continue with a way to singe from the inside, the torture of molten gold. If you are fans of Game of Thrones, you will surely remember a shocking death, which occurs when Khal Drogo spills molten gold on another character's head. We will not say more information so as not to give you spoilers. Curiously, this scene has more historical background than it seems, since there was a terrible punishment reserved for the highest social classes with molten gold. And how did they do it? Forcing them to forcibly drink this precious metal in its liquid and burning form. First, the victim's larynx became completely rigid, becoming like a stone. The muscles burned from the high temperature of the gold, swelled and collapsed until they burst. The organs began rapid necrosis until, finally, they suffered agonizing asphyxiation and died, burned and paralyzed. The reason why was that it was a punishment reserved for people who belonged to the upper class, such as kings or princes. It's more than evident. Because of the great value of gold. The most famous historical case was that of Marcus Licinius Crassus, a Roman general and politician known for being a great military strategist. After several victories throughout his life, his army was defeated, and he was captured by the Persian king. Once in his camp, the king ordered his soldiers to immerse him in a bath of molten gold. They poured the burning liquid all over his body and head, burning his flesh. It is said that this punishment was applied to him to symbolize his thirst for wealth. The next torture we will talk about is the mancuerda. There are different theories about how this punishment works. The most widespread is the following. First, they tie the victim to a resistant surface so that he couldn't move, even when applying great force. Both his torso, arms, and feet were completely fixed. Then the torturer would grab a very thin rope and wrap a part of it around his body. Once everything was prepared, the executor pulled the rope with his own strength, or with the help of a lever. And what did this produce? First, the rope cut the skin, then the muscle, being able to reach the bone. It is said that in the years in which this punishment was carried out, a kind of competition was created between the executioners to see who was able to go the farthest, creating extreme pain without killing the condemned. In most cases, these faded in the process due to suffering. In other variants of the same torture, it is mentioned that the rope was only passed around the arms and wrists. The executioner wound the tape around the victim and then threw himself backwards, throwing all his weight towards the opposite side, achieving the same result, cutting the flesh until he reached the bone. The process was repeated approximately 5 or 6 times. In addition to physical pain, serious injuries were also caused to the hands and wrists, including fractures, tears, and nerve damage. Sometimes there was a possibility of tightening with the help of a wheel, instead of with physical force. Like many other forms of torture, it was used both to obtain confessions and to punish and intimidate those considered transgressors or enemies of the established power. The following torture is one of the most cruel and merciless, in which the birds also participated. When a man was blamed for having a different sexual orientation, he was subjected to this torment, which also served as a warning to others. He was taken to a public square where a stake stuck in the ground was waiting for him. There, they tied his limbs with thick ropes, leaving him immobilized and exposed. While he remained in this vulnerable position, the executioners poured a substance very attractive to animals, and above all to birds, on his private parts. Until then, we can say that the punishment was hard due to the exposure of his naked body. It was public humiliation, but there was no physical pain. However, as you can imagine, this is not the worst part. Soon, the air was filled with a flattering of birds of prey, attracted by the smell of the substance. Eagles, crows, and magpies descended from the sky. Their sharp beaks dug into the skin of the man's most sensitive area, tearing off chunks of flesh and leaving behind deep, bloody wounds. Each peck became torture in itself. The victims screamed and writhed, unsuccessfully trying to scare away the birds that showed no mercy. And finally, although we already have a video on the channel, this compilation of punishment wouldn't be complete without making a small mention of the saw torture. Cutting a person in half is already heartbreaking, but if we add to that the fact that they were hanging by their feet, with their head down, while they felt like they were sewing them in half, we find ourselves facing one of the worst tortures in history. Due to the victim's inverted position, torturers made sure that he didn't lose too much blood, and that enough oxygen reached the brain, ensuring a slow and painful death until the end. The victim didn't lose consciousness until the saw reached the navel, and sometimes even the chest. We can't even imagine how terrible it must have been to die this way. This list of tortures could go on with many more. Unfortunately, humans have carried out these practices for dozens of centuries. Although the situation is very different, there are still several countries where they are still carried out frequently. If you have been wanting to know more examples of historical torture, you can access the playlist we have in the channel. You will be surprised to learn about cases such as escapism, the cradle of Judas, or the torture of the wheel. If you like this section, don't forget to tell us in the comments with more examples to include in the next video. We rate you. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it, and if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you in the next episode!